Hey folks, I was driving back to campus last night, half asleep, listening to one of those encounter channels. The guy was telling a story about something upright and wolf-headed messing around with his cows. He said the arms were too long, and said it moved like it understood what it was doing. I had to pull over on the side of the road because my hands started shaking. It took me right back to something that happened to me over a decade ago. I haven't thought about that night in years. I packed it away the way you pack away anything that doesn't fit with normal life. Probably some kind of unconscious protective mechanism of the brain. Anyway, this happened when I was 14. It was in the Adirondacks, on a Boy Scouts excursion. I'm not going to name the exact trail or the lean-to, because I don't want people going up there looking for it. It was a normal weekend backpacking trip, the kind we did a couple of times every year. 2 nights out, hike in, camp, hike out. Nothing out of the ordinary. I'll tell you who I was back then so you understand where my head was at. My name is Jake. I grew up in Albany, New York. I was a Boy Scout since I turned 8. I wasn't a tough guy. I wasn't the loud one. I was the kid who followed the rules and tried to do things right. I liked camping, and I liked being out in nature, but I also got nervous at night, as most kids do. I didn't tell people that because nobody wanted to be the scared one. We had 8 boys on that trip, plus 2 adult leaders. Most of the boys were between 12 and 16. There were a couple of older ones who were close to aging out. One of them, a guy named Josh, was the calmest person there. He was 17, almost 18. He did most things like an adult already. He was the one who knew where everything was and didn't panic when something went wrong. The 2 adult leaders were Mr. Klein and Mr. Peters. Mr. Klein was the main guy in charge. He had a big personality and acted confident all the time. Mr. Peters was quieter. He mostly stayed back and let Klein run things. We hiked in that day for a few hours. It was late summer, but the nights were starting to cool off. The bugs weren't terrible. The woods were thick, mostly hardwoods with some pine mixed in. Typical Adirondack forest. We got to the lean-to in the late afternoon. It was one of those standard 3-sided shelters with logs for benches and a fire ring out front. There was a little flat area nearby where we set up a few tents. Water was down a short side trail at a stream. We did everything the way we were taught. Bear bag hung away from camp, food sealed up. No snacks in tents. Mr. Klein made a big deal out of it because he loved telling stories about bears. We cooked dinner, cleaned up, and sat around the fire for a while. The usual. Dumb jokes, someone playing with the flashlight beam on the trees, people talking about school and girls. It was dark out there. Not like pitch black, because you always get a little light from the sky, but dark enough that the trees blend together. At some point, Mr. Klein assigned a fire watch, 2 boys at a time, rotating. It wasn't because we were worried about anything. It was because he liked the routine, and he liked feeling like we were doing a real camp. When my turn came, I crawled out of my sleeping bag and pulled on my boots. I had my headlamp and my jacket. My partner on watch was a younger kid named Ryan. He was 12 and small for his age. He looked half asleep already. We sat by the fire and fed a couple of sticks onto the coals. The fire wasn't roaring. It was just enough to keep the embers alive. The woods were quiet except for the normal stuff, like leaves shifting in a light breeze and a distant owl. Ryan asked me if bears ever came into camp. I told him not really, which was mostly true. I'd seen bear signs before, and we'd had one time when something messed with a bear bag on a different trip, but nothing like an actual bear walking into camp. We were about 20 minutes into our watch when I noticed the bear line. We had the bear bag hung on a branch, maybe 100 feet from the lean-to, down a little path through the trees. You could see it if you pointed a light that way. We had a rope tied off to a tree trunk, and the bag was up high, 12 feet or so. The rope moved, not a big swing like the wind, a twitch, then it went still, then another twitch. I pointed my headlamp in that direction. At first, all I saw was the rope and the bag hanging there, and the light cutting through branches. Then I saw something near the base of the tree. It was low, like it was crouched. I thought it was a bear right away. That's what everyone thinks. I remember feeling a spike of fear and a weird excitement at the same time. I stood up and told Ryan to stay by the fire. I took a few steps toward the hang, not all the way, just closer, and I swept the light around. The shape moved. It came forward a little into a clearer patch between trunks, and the light caught it enough that my brain stopped trying to label it a bear immediately. It was too lean for a bear, too tall through the shoulders even while it was crouched. The arms, that's what they looked like, were long and thick, much longer than a bear's. It reacted to my headlamp. The head lifted. That's the part that still makes my stomach flip. The head was a wolf's head, a huge one. Not a cartoon wolf and not a normal wolf either. The muzzle was heavy and blunt, and the brow was thick, almost like it had a ridge. The ears were pointed and set high. The eyes reflected the headlamp light in a dirty yellow-orange, like most animals' eyes do at night. But it wasn't shaped like an animal that belongs on all fours all the time. It looked like something built wrong on purpose, like a huge wolf head on a body that could stand up or even climb. It moved one of its arms up the trunk of the hang tree, and I heard the bark scrape. Not a small sound. A dry, tearing scrape like nails on wood. Claws, as I was about to find out. Then it did something that made it worse. It did indeed stand up. Not all the way at first. It rose from that crouch and came up on two legs like that was completely normal for it. The chest came up, and the shoulders rolled forward. It was still hunched, but taller than me by quite a bit. That much was obvious. It didn't wobble. It didn't look like it was struggling to balance. It looked comfortable upright. I froze up. I couldn't make my legs move. Ryan, behind me, whispered, "What is that?" I didn't answer because I didn't have words. I backed up a step without taking my eyes off it. The thing stayed by the tree, one arm touching the trunk, the other hanging down by its side. It turned its head slightly, like it had heard us, and I could see the profile of that muzzle. That was the moment I knew I wasn't looking at a person. Up until then, some part of my brain was still trying to read this as a prank by one of the other guys. Wouldn't have been the first time. That ended right there. Ryan started to whimper. He was scared. It just stared at us for a few seconds, not blinking, not moving much, like it was deciding what we were. Then it turned its eyes away from the headlamp beam and went right back to the bear bag like that was the main prize. That's when I saw it clearly enough to know it had hands. Real, functional hands. It reached up and worked the rope the bag was strung up on, tugging and feeling for slack, like it understood how it was hung. It didn't attack then. It was focused on the food. That's when Mr. Klein came out of his tent. He must have heard something. He came out fast, boots half-laced, and he was already angry. He was the type who got loud when he was nervous. "What are you two doing?" he snapped. I pointed toward the hang tree. He followed my light and saw the silhouette. For a second, he went quiet. Then, instead of telling us to back up or waking everyone calmly, he started shouting and making a big scene. He started screaming and lobbing whatever he could get his hands on. Rocks first, then sticks, then handfuls of debris from around the fire ring. You could hear the impacts when something hit a tree trunk, and you could hear branches snapping when he threw into the brush. He wasn't aiming carefully. He was just trying to drive it off with noise and force, acting like the loudest thing in the woods automatically wins. His behavior made the whole situation feel more chaotic. In hindsight, I think it was him who turned a tense moment into a full-fledged fight, putting us all in danger for no good reason. The creature didn't run. That's the part I think about now, because it's not what a bear does. A bear either bolts or charges. It doesn't do what this thing did. It stepped toward us calmly, almost as if it were studying us. It moved away from the hang tree and into the open area between the trees, closer to the fire ring. It was still mostly in the shadows, but we could see enough of it in the beam of my headlamp. It wasn't charging yet. The ruckus was slowly waking up the entire camp. Boys started popping out of tents. The site filled with movement. Someone yelled, "What's happening?" Another kid started crying immediately when his eyes found the thing Mr. Klein was trying to scare off. A couple of kids were laughing like it was a joke, even after they had seen the creature. The flashlights and headlamps turned the whole camp into a mess of beams crossing and shaking. Mr. Klein just kept yelling and throwing stuff. Then the creature's behavior changed. It charged forward, on four legs, but skidded to a stop about 30 feet from Mr. Klein. That stop brought it close enough that we could actually see it in decent light, not just a shape in the trees. Between the fire, the headlamps, and all the flashlights shaking around. The creature kept flashing in and out like a strobe, and every glimpse was worse than the last. The head was definitely canine, with a heavy muzzle and thick brow, ears pinned up high, and the shoulders were huge, rolling forward like it was built for strength more than anything. Its arms were too long and ended in human-like hands, just as I had suspected earlier, with dark claws that looked like they belonged on a big cat more than anything. It was wet-looking around the mouth and nose, and the fur on its chest and forearms looked sparser than on the back and neck. Some of its body looked almost naked. For a second nobody made a sound, like the whole camp just locked up at once, even Mr. Klein. I felt that cold, blank shock in my chest that turns into terror a beat later, when you realize you're standing out in the open with nothing but a flashlight between you and something that could tear you apart in half a second. Then it rose up on two legs again, dropped its shoulders, leaned forward, and spread its arms and hands like it was making itself look bigger, which was insane because it was already huge. I was 5'7" at the time, and this thing was a head taller than me, even in this posture. It opened its mouth and showed teeth. It wasn't a full snarl like a dog snapping. It was a low, steady bearing, paired with a growl that rolled out of an enormous set of lungs. That growl is hard to describe. It sounded like an animal, but much deeper, not supernatural, just big lungs and a throat made for that kind of sound. Mr. Klein took a step back, then another. The creature took another step forward. The boys' reactions were all over the place. A couple were crying and trying to hide behind or inside the lean-to. One younger kid started screaming for his dad. Mr. Peters and two of the older boys were standing there with their lights on it, like they couldn't look away. I remember one kid whispering, "Holy shit," under his breath over and over. I couldn't move. I felt like my whole body was locked. Mr. Klein lost it. He turned and ran, not back into the lean-to, not to gather us. He ran down the trail, trying to get away from camp and this thing entirely. Didn't even grab a flashlight. I remember a horrible second where nobody understood what just happened. The adult was gone. The guy in charge was gone. Mr. Peters was still there, but he looked just as shocked, and he didn't do anything to get the situation under control. He just kept saying, get inside," like repeating it would make it happen. The creature kept coming a little, still not charging, just closing distance, growling, posturing, swiping the air. It looked like it wanted to intimidate us more than anything. That's when Josh stepped up. Josh was one of the older boys, 17. He had just been staring until that point. Now he had made up his mind and was moving like someone who knew exactly what to do. He shoved past a couple of kids, grabbed the bear spray from his tent, and pulled the safety tab. He planted himself between the creature and the rest of us. He didn't yell. He didn't throw rocks. He just held up the can with both hands, arms straight, and waited. The creature didn't stop growling and took another step toward him. Josh gave it one warning. "Back up," he said. His voice cracked, but he said it anyway. It didn't back up. It shifted its weight backwards, and its arm drew back for a swipe. Josh hit it, a full blast from about 8 to 10 feet away. The stream hit the creature across the face and muzzle. It was close enough that it didn't just drift. It landed. The reaction was instant. The creature snapped its head to the side and jerked back like it had been slapped hard. It made a choking sound and started pawing at its face with both hands. It stumbled sideways, still on two legs for a second, then dropped to 3 and backed away, one hand still raking its face. It didn't run blindly. It retreated in a somewhat coordinated manner, still trying to keep eyes on us through the pain. It ran towards the bear bag, bumped into the odd bush, and snapped a few branches, then vanished into the dark. We all stood there with our lights pointed in that direction, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Not that night. After that, the camp fell apart. Boys were crying. A couple were shaking so hard they couldn't talk. Some were trying to act tough and saying it was just a bear, even though nobody believed it. Mr. Peters kept calling Klein's name down the trail, and there was no answer. Josh told everyone to get inside the lean-to and stay together. We packed into that shelter like sardines. Someone built up the fire. Nobody slept. Mr. Klein didn't come back to camp. We stayed huddled up for the rest of the night. We hiked out at first light. We didn't have breakfast. We just packed and left. On the way out, Josh and I walked back to the hang tree area, mostly because Josh wanted to see if there was any sign. There was. The bark on the hang tree was scraped up in long, vertical lines, higher than any of us could reach without climbing. The ground around the base was torn up. There were prints too, but they weren't clean. More like big, smeared impressions from something that moved on both hands and feet. We didn't take pictures. None of us brought phones on these scout trips. When we got back to the cars, we finally caught up with Mr. Klein. He and Mr. Peters had a brief talk, then told us to keep it quiet and call it a bear. They said nobody would believe anything else, and it would just cause problems for the scouts. I went along with it. Everyone did. But I didn't forget what I saw. I just buried it. I'm not saying it was an actual werewolf. It looked like an animal, a real, physical thing that could be hurt, because bear spray worked. It didn't want to get sprayed again, and it didn't want a real fight. It was after the food in the bear bag, and it only attacked after Mr. Klein started messing with it. But it also wasn't an animal that belonged out there, or anywhere in the world, really. If you're reading this and you spend time in the Adirondacks, or anywhere in the woods, I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you not to get careless at night. Keep your food hung right. Don't wander off alone. If something feels wrong, listen to that feeling. And if you ever see something upright in the trees that isn't supposed to be upright, don't do what Mr. Klein did. Don't make noise, act tough, and assume you're in control. Get your people together and stay calm. My name's Mark Heller. I've been driving trucks a long time, mostly up and down the Northeast, running whatever freight keeps the bills paid. Honestly, I thought I'd seen everything. I don't jump to weird conclusions when something doesn't make sense right away. But what I saw in the Adirondacks earlier this year was something else. This happened on Interstate 87, north of Lake George. I won't name the exact truck stop, but anyone who runs the Northway knows the kind of place I mean. A standard pull-off with parking for cars and trucks, lights that don't quite reach the tree line, and woods pressing in close on the far side of the lot. It was early fall, cool but not snowing yet, clear night. I had shut down there around 11. I was hauling a dry van, nothing hazmat, nothing special. I backed into a spot near the edge of the truck section, killed the engine, did my usual walk-around, and climbed into the sleeper. There were maybe 6 or 7 other rigs parked there, all spread out. One was 3 spaces down from me, parked parallel. I remember noticing it because the driver had left his cab light on for a bit before turning in. I fell asleep without any trouble. Woke up sometime after 1 in the morning. No nightmare, no noise that jumped out at me right away. Just that half-awake feeling where you know something pulled you up out of sleep, but you don't know what yet. I lay there listening, trying to place it. At first I thought it was just the truck rocking in the wind or someone climbing into a cab nearby. Then I heard it again. A faint sound, something hitting metal, not sharp. More like a light scrape followed by a dull tap. Again, not loud, just enough to register. I held my breath and listened harder. There was another sound a few seconds later, almost like something dragging lightly across aluminum, then stopping, then nothing for a bit. Then it happened again. Same pattern, same spot. It didn't sound like someone banging around or trying to break into anything, but it was odd enough to pique my interest. Some people come up to trucks at night and mess around, stealing diesel and stuff. That's when I got the sense it wasn't right outside my truck. The sound wasn't close enough for that. It was farther off, muted by distance. I guessed it was coming from somewhere down the row. I wasn't too concerned at that point. Yes, it could be something shady, but more than likely, it was just someone checking their rig or watching a damn video on their phone while taking a piss. I told myself I'd check it out, then go back to sleep. I slid forward and looked out through the windshield. The lot lights were on, but like most rest areas up there, they didn't light things evenly. The center of the lot was fine. The edges dropped off into shadow fast. I could see the outlines of the other trucks on both sides. That's when I saw movement near the rig on my right. It was low, at the back of the cab, behind the steps, and near the fuel tanks. Something huge was crouched there, but mostly in the shadow. At first glance, my brain tried to make it a person, probably the driver checking for leaks or something. Then the figure shifted its posture, It rose up. Whatever it wasn't quite standing like a man. The proportions were wrong. First of all, it was too tall. The shoulders were too high and thick, and the arms hung down weirdly in front of it. When it leaned toward the cab, I saw one arm lift and rake across the metal near the step. Not hard, just enough to feel the metal. That matched the sounds I'd been hearing. Scrape, tap, scratch. I stayed still, watching. It took one long step closer to the door, and that's when the silhouette of the head came into view a little more. My eyes were adjusting at the same time, and the lot light caught just enough of the outline for my brain to finally quit, trying to make it a person. The head wasn't round like a man's, and it wasn't a hood or a hat. It had a muzzle. The profile looked like a wolf's head pushed forward off a thick neck and flanked by massive high shoulders. That was the moment it really hit me hard, that I wasn't watching a human being messing with a truck. The creature moved slowly around between the cab door and the front of the truck, feeling along the metal with one hand, then the other. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't clumsy. It looked deliberate, like it was investigating and trying to understand. It was upright, hunched, but well-balanced, comfortable walking on two legs, the legs bent backward at the lower joint, not like a man's, like a wolf's. I didn't see any clothes, no gear, no sign that it was a person in a costume or some kind of prank. The body was covered in dark fur, thicker around the shoulders and neck, thinner along the arms and sides. It was big, the size of a tall, muscular man. Even standing 3 spaces away, I could tell it had mass to it. I realized what it was right then. I'd heard the term Dogman before, same as most drivers who spend nights on the road with podcasts playing day and night. I'd always lumped it in with Bigfoot stories and late-night nonsense. These stories were entertaining, but I didn't believe in them. The thing I was looking at fit those descriptions too well to ignore. I remember thinking, very clearly, that if it decided to come my way, there was nothing between us but 30 feet of pavement and a thin cab door. I keep a revolver in the truck. Legally. I'm not looking to debate that. I've had it for years, mostly for peace of mind. I'd never fired it outside a range before, but something told me to grab it in that moment. I fumbled it out of the box with shaking hands and put it on the dash, just in case. The creature was still focused on the other rig. It leaned in toward the door, lifted one arm again, and dragged its claws across the metal near the handle. This time, the sound carried a little farther, a dry scraping noise that made my teeth itch. That was the point where I decided I wasn't going to sit there and wait for it to break in and attack whoever was sleeping in there. I hadn't seen anything of them so far. A lot of us sleep with earplugs to block out the noise of passing rigs. That would explain why they hadn't noticed anything yet, and wouldn't until it was too late, if this thing decided to check out the inside of the cab. I checked the revolver to make sure it was loaded. It only had 4 rounds in it, and I didn't have any additional ammo with me. That would have to do. I turned the key just enough to power the window and eased it down a few inches. I didn't want to make noise or draw attention. Then I leaned in close and lined up as best I could through the gap. I fired. The sound inside the cab hit me a lot harder than I expected. The revolver went off like a bomb in that small space, the noise bouncing around my head and stealing my breath for a second. I saw the round hit. I know I did, because the creature jolted hard, like it had been yanked sideways by a rope. That blast cost me a beat before I could line up a second shot. It turned toward me, fast. For a split second, I saw its face clearly. Broad muzzle, dark eyes, teeth visible, not bared in a snarl, but exposed as it reacted. Then it dropped down onto all 4s and took off. I've seen animals move fast before. Deer, bears, even moose in the road. This was different. It folded into that 4-legged run like it was built for it, as much as it was for walking upright, and crossed the distance to the tree line in the back in seconds. That's when I lost my nerve. Instead of taking a breath and aiming properly, I just lined up loosely and pulled the trigger again. Too fast. The recoil pulled the barrel off target, and I knew even as I was doing it that I was wasting rounds. I fired at the shape as it ran, but the darkness and speed swallowed it up. The last shot rang out just as it vanished into the woods. The silence afterward felt wrong. No crashing, no movement, just the hum of distant traffic. Then the doors started opening. The driver from the other rig came out first. He was pissed, and I don't blame him. Barefoot, jacket half on, yelling about gunfire and asking if I'd lost my damn mind. Another truck's lights came on farther down the row. I cracked my door and stepped down, keeping my voice calm. I told him there'd been a bear messing with his truck. I said it had been standing up at the cab and scratching around, and I fired to scare it off. He didn't believe me at first. I could see it on his face. Who would? So we walked over to his rig together. The marks were there. Fresh scratches on the metal near the steps and lower cab panel. Shallow but clear. Not something you'd get from road debris or a careless boot. Long parallel lines, angled slightly, with the paint scuffed down to bare metal in places. There was also a dent near the fuel tank strap, as if something heavy had leaned into it. He stared at those marks for a long time. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. He finally shook his head and swore under his breath. Said he'd seen bears sniff around trucks before, but never mess with gear like that. He told me I scared the hell out of him, but he understood why I'd fired. About 20 minutes later, a sheriff's car rolled into the lot with its headlights sweeping across the trucks. Someone had called the cops. The deputies wanted to know why I was firing a handgun in a public lot, where the rounds went, and if anyone had been in the line of fire. I pointed them straight to the claw marks and the dent by the fuel tank strap. Thank God those were there, because without them, I'm pretty sure I would have gone to jail that night. Standing there talking to a deputy in the middle of the night, I realized how stupid it was that I hadn't thought it through before I pulled the trigger. I drove out at first light and didn't stop until I was well south of Adirondack Park. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to talk myself into a normal explanation, and I couldn't. If something like that is real, then I don't know what else might be real. Maybe Bigfoot isn't just a joke people tell on the radio. I'm not saying I'm a believer in everything now. I'm saying I saw what I saw, and it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a man. All I can tell people is this: be careful in remote, forested areas at night. Lock your doors, keep your head on a swivel, and don't assume you're the biggest thing out there just because you're holding the keys to a truck.